A Latina schoolteacher wants to build a garden for her students. The HOA says no. One form letter. No explanation. No engagement. Just, no. So she does what teachers do. She starts asking questions. And what she finds buried in a 1987 deed isn't just a legal technicality. It's evidence that the man running her neighborhood has been hiding something for years. From the community. From the buyer. From everyone. Except the one person he never thought would look. The ground beneath Elmwood. Some people bury the truth thinking it stays buried. They forget, a good gardener always knows what's underneath. The lot had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. It sat at the corner of Elmwood Avenue and 3rd Street, half an acre of compacted urban soil, cracked at the surface, threaded with dandelions and crabgrass that returned every spring regardless of what anyone did to prevent them. A chain-link fence ran its perimeter, padlocked at the single gate, wearing a patina of rust that suggested installation during an administration nobody currently living could clearly remember. The lot belonged, according to the county assessor's records, to the Elmwood Park Homeowners Association. Beyond that, its history was murky in the way that urban land histories become murky when nobody has needed to examine them for a long time. Elena Vasquez had been looking at it for 3 years. She drove past it every morning on her way to Jefferson Elementary, past the fence, past the padlock, past the dandelions doing their patient work in the cracks, and thought about soil. About what the ground under all that compaction might be, what it might become with amendment and care, what you could grow in it if you gave it what it needed and the patience to wait for the response. She thought about her students, who were 8 and 9 and 10 years old and had, most of them, never touched soil with the intention of making something grow. She thought about her grandmother's hands, dark and certain in the earth of a garden in Oaxaca, moving with the knowledge that lived in the body before it lived anywhere else. She was 38 years old, a teacher of urban agriculture at a public elementary school in a neighborhood where the median household income was $34,000, and the nearest full-service grocery store was 2 bus transfers away. She had been teaching there for 9 years, in a program she had built from nothing, from a single raised bed on a concrete pad, funded by a $400 grant she had written on a Saturday afternoon, to a 4-bed growing system producing real food for the school's lunch program and real knowledge for the children who tended it. What it had not produced was space. 4 beds were meaningful and insufficient, and Elena had been thinking about the insufficiency for 3 years. The Elmwood Park lot was half an acre. A half acre, properly managed, could feed a school. She submitted her first proposal to the Elmwood Park HOA in March 2024, 12 pages, formal, with a budget, a curriculum plan, a maintenance schedule, letters of support from the school principal and the district's nutrition director, and a section on the educational research supporting garden-based learning in low-income communities. She had spent 4 Sundays writing it. She had asked her colleague James, who had a master's in public administration, to review the structure. She had printed it on good paper and delivered it by hand to the HOA's management office on a Tuesday morning. The response came 6 weeks later. 1 paragraph. Signed by Clifton Marsh, President. After careful review, the board has determined that the proposed use is inconsistent with the community's aesthetic standards and long-term property value objectives. The lot is currently under evaluation for alternative development that better serves the interests of all Elmwood Park residents. Elena read it 3 times. Not because the words were ambiguous, they were precise, in the way that dismissals written by lawyers are precise, but because she was looking for evidence that anyone had read her proposal. A specific objection. A referenced page. Any indication that the 12 pages had been engaged with rather than set aside. There was none. She put the letter in a folder she labeled Elmwood Lot. She wrote the phrase under evaluation for alternative development on a notepad and stared at it for a long time. Then she started paying a different kind of attention. She had grown up 3 miles from Elmwood Park, in a neighborhood that shared no border with it and did not resemble it. Her parents had come from Oaxaca in 1984, her father in construction, her mother cleaning houses, both working the particular arithmetic of immigrant life where every calculation pointed toward what the children would have that the parents had not. Elena was the middle of 3. Her teachers noted, consistently, from 3rd grade onward, one specific word: persistent. She had been persistent about the right things. About finishing her degree at Colorado State when money ran short in her junior year. About the urban agriculture certification she completed on evenings and weekends while student teaching. About the program at Jefferson Elementary, which the district had not funded and had not prevented and had therefore existed in the space between those 2 positions, growing slowly, stubbornly, like the dandelions in the Elmwood lot. She had also been persistent, where necessary, about being taken seriously. She was a young woman of Mexican descent teaching what some people called, when being polite, a non-traditional subject at a school that some people called, when being honest, A difficult school. She had been told, in various registers and formulations over 9 years, that her program was charming, that it was a nice activity for the children, that it was admirable how much she cared, that perhaps when she had more experience she would find more opportunities. She had been told these things by district administrators and grant reviewers and community members and, once, by a man at a curriculum fair who picked up her program brochure, looked at her, looked at the brochure again, and said, with genuine warmth, which somehow made it worse, "It's wonderful that someone like you is doing this work." She had smiled and said, "Thank you," and spent the rest of the afternoon being exactly as effective as she had been before he said it. Persistence was the answer to most of what the world offered in the way of discouragement. Not because it solved the underlying problem, it didn't, mostly, but because the alternative was to let someone else determine the ceiling of what you could do, and that was a determination she had never been willing to accept. She looked up Clifton Marsh the evening after receiving his letter. He was 64, a former real estate attorney retired 6 years ago, HOA president for 4 years. By all public accounts, effective, well-maintained community, organized finances, thorough newsletters. He drove a dark blue Lexus and served on 2 additional community boards. He was, in the language of civic life, a pillar. She looked up the Elmwood Park lot in the county assessor's records. The HOA had held it since 1987, transferred from a previous owner whose name, Margaret Eleanor Whitfield, meant nothing to Elena at the time. She wrote the name down anyway. She looked up Whitfield. Margaret Eleanor Whitfield had died in 1985 at 81. Her Denver Post obituary, found through the library's historical newspaper database on a Thursday evening after her students had gone home, described her as a longtime Denver resident, a community organizer, a gardener, and the person most responsible for establishing the Elmwood Park neighborhood as a planned residential community in the early 1950s. The second-to-last paragraph mentioned that Mrs. Whitfield had donated several parcels to the Elmwood Park Community Association upon her death, for the perpetual use and benefit of the community's residents. Elena wrote that phrase on her notepad and underlined it twice. Then she went to the county recorder's office. The deed was filed in 1987. The records clerk who helped her was a patient man in his 50s named Raymond who had clearly explained deed language to many people who were not lawyers and had developed a gift for it. He read the relevant section carefully. Then again. "This is a conditional transfer," he said. "This section here is called a deed restriction. It says the property is transferred with the condition that it be used solely for community benefit purposes of a non-commercial nature, including parks, gardens, recreational facilities, or educational programs serving the residents of Elmwood Park and the surrounding community." "Does that restriction still apply?" Elena asked. Deed restrictions generally run with the land. Unless they've been legally extinguished, which requires a specific process, court action, usually. It doesn't just lapse. He looked at the deed again. There's also a reversion clause. See this language? If the property is ever used for commercial purposes or transferred to a non-community entity, the property reverts to the Whitfield Family Trust. Automatically, by operation of the deed. "Reverts," Elena said. "Goes back to the family." "Goes back to the family," Raymond confirmed. "And a commercial parking structure would almost certainly qualify as commercial purposes. A retail development definitely would." Elena looked at the page for a moment. "Has anyone else asked about this deed in recent years?" Raymond checked his records. "Not that I can find. The lot's been dormant, no transactions, no inquiries." He looked at her. "You're the first person to pull this in a long time." She understood, then, why the restriction had survived undiscovered for 37 years. The lot was empty. Nothing had happened to it. Nobody had needed to look. You only looked when you had a reason, and until Elena had submitted a proposal that someone needed to reject, nobody had given anyone a reason to look at all. She paid for a certified copy and walked out with the deed in her bag. She called her friend Destiny on the way to her car. Destiny Washington was 35, a paralegal at a civil rights firm, and the person Elena called when she needed to understand something legal without paying attorney rates for the first explanation. She explained everything. Destiny listened without interrupting. "Send me the deed," Destiny said. "Give me an hour." Destiny called back in 40 minutes. "You're reading it correctly. The restriction is valid. The reversion clause is real. If Clifton Marsh sells that lot to a commercial developer without extinguishing the restriction, which requires court action he hasn't taken, the property doesn't go to the developer. It reverts to whoever currently holds the Whitfield Trust." "He's a former real estate attorney," Elena said. 4 years as president. He had access to the deed. "So he knew," Destiny said. "So he knew," Elena said. "What are you going to do?" Elena looked at the chain-link fence through her car window. "The padlock. The dandelions. I'm going to find the Whitfield family, she said. It took 2 weeks and 3 dead ends. Margaret Whitfield's estate had passed to her daughter Patricia, who had died in 2009. Patricia's estate had passed to 2 children, a son named Daniel Connors in Portland, and a daughter named Rose Connors Webb in Aurora, 20 minutes from Elena's school. Elena wrote Rose a letter, handwritten, on good paper, explaining who she was, what she had found, and what she wanted to discuss. Certified mail, Monday morning. Rose called Thursday afternoon. She was 67, and her voice had the steadiness of a woman who had been paying attention for a long time and had learned to trust what she observed. She had received the letter, she said. Read it several times. My grandmother cared deeply about that lot, Rose said. She maintained it as a garden herself for years. She used to walk us through it when we were children and call it the community's heart. A pause. I assumed it was still being used as a garden. I haven't thought about it in a long time. It's been empty for at least 20 years, Elena said. A silence that contained grief and something gathering behind it. And someone is trying to sell it commercially, Rose said. Without disclosing the deed restriction to the buyer, Elena said. And without notifying the community that a sale is being considered. He knows about the restriction, Rose said. Not a question. He's a former real estate attorney who has been president for 4 years, Elena said. He had access to the original deed. The silence this time was shorter. What do you need from me? I want to make a garden, Elena said. For children who have never grown food. On land that was set aside for exactly that purpose 70 years ago. She paused. And I want to do it before someone sells it. Rose was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had something in it that Elena could not precisely name, the sound of a person reconnecting with something they had not known they had lost. Tell me what you need, Rose said. Destiny's firm agreed to take the case pro bono. The attorney assigned was Kevin Park, 29, meticulous, possessed of the energy of a young lawyer who had found a case he genuinely cared about. Kevin's first task, verify the deed restriction's legal status and determine whether any steps had been taken to extinguish it. He spent a week in county records. His findings were more significant than Elena had expected. The restriction was fully valid and had never been challenged. But more importantly, the HOA's internal property records, the records Clifton Marsh would have used in evaluating the lot for sale, contained a reformatted version of the deed from 2019. The property description was there. The transfer date was there. The restriction language was not. Someone edited this, Kevin said, when he showed Elena the side-by-side comparison at her kitchen table. The original is in the county recorder's files, intact. The HOA's internal copy has the restriction language removed. Elena looked at the 2 documents. He edited his own records so the board would evaluate the sale without knowing about the restriction. The board, the membership, the buyer, Kevin said. Everyone who relied on the HOA's internal records instead of the original deed. He looked at her. This isn't negligence. This is deliberate. What are the implications? Civil fraud at minimum. Depending on what the investigation finds, and there will be an investigation, potentially criminal. He paused. Elena. What he did to your proposal is one thing. What he did to these records is another level entirely. She nodded. She had understood this when she saw the 2 documents side by side. Understanding it and knowing what to do with it were the same thing. In this case, document everything, proceed correctly, let the law do what the law was built for. The same week Elena submitted her proposal, a notice had appeared in the Denver Business Journal's commercial real estate section, brief, easy to miss unless you were looking for it, announcing that a half-acre parcel in the Elmwood Park neighborhood was under preliminary contract with Meridian Commercial Development LLC for conversion to a structured parking facility. Elena had found this through a Google alert she had set for Elmwood Park the week after receiving Marcia's rejection letter. She found it at 11:15 on a Tuesday night, sitting up so quickly she startled her cat. Kevin confirmed that the HOA's bylaws required a 2/3 majority vote of the full membership for any sale of common area property. He reviewed 4 years of meeting minutes. There had been no vote. No mention of a proposed sale. No agenda item, no discussion, no notification to the membership. What there was, buried in the March meeting minutes, was a line item authorizing the HOA president to engage in preliminary discussions with interested parties regarding the long-term development potential of association-held parcels. Approved 4-1, in a meeting attended by 11 of Elmwood Park's 340 households, with no public notice beyond the standard announcement. He used that language to negotiate a full sale without triggering the vote requirement, Kevin said. He was going to present the membership with a done deal, signed contract, favorable terms, momentum making no seem obstructionist, and then hold the required vote when resistance had the least traction. Would it have worked? Elena asked. Kevin thought about it honestly. It's worked before. When the membership doesn't know the alternative, when the deal looks beneficial, when opposition doesn't have time to organize, he paused. Yes. It often works. Especially when the person raising the objection can be characterized as an outsider who doesn't understand the community's interests. Elena looked at her copy of Marcia's rejection letter. Outside interference from a non-resident. The phrase he had used when trying to stop the special meeting. He read my proposal, she said. 12 pages, professional, letters of support, full curriculum plan. He read it and decided it wasn't a threat. That I wasn't a threat. Because? Kevin asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Because he looked at a 38-year-old Latina schoolteacher from the south side of town and made a calculation, Elena said. Not a hostile calculation, necessarily. Just a categorical one. He put me in a category of people who don't cause real problems, who can be managed with a form letter, who don't have the resources or connections to make things difficult. She paused. He made the same calculation about Claudette. About anyone who wasn't the kind of person he was accustomed to taking seriously. He was wrong, Destiny said. He was wrong, Elena said. But the calculation wasn't random. It was based on patterns that are usually correct. That's what makes it structural rather than personal. Most of the time, a form letter is enough. Most of the time, the person on the other end of the form letter doesn't have a friend who's a paralegal, doesn't know to go to the county recorder's office, doesn't have 3 Sundays to spend in the legal database. She looked at the table covered in documents. The system works on probability. I just happen to be a bad probability. Destiny and Kevin looked at her. Kevin wrote something on his legal pad. Claudette Morrison, Destiny said. Tell me about her. Claudette Morrison had cast the single dissenting vote on the preliminary discussions authorization, 1 vote against, in a meeting attended by 11 households. Elena had noticed it in the minutes and tracked down her address. She knocked on Claudette's door on a Saturday morning. Claudette answered with the expression of a person who had been expecting a knock she hadn't known she was expecting. I voted against it, Claudette said, before Elena had finished explaining. Come in. Claudette was 59, black, a retired city planner who had lived in Elmwood Park for 22 years and served on the HOA board for 3. She had the precise posture and economical speech of someone who had presided over difficult public meetings for decades and had learned that every unnecessary word was a word that could be used against you. She listened to everything Elena laid out, the deed, the restriction, the edited records, the business journal notice, the Whitfield family, Kevin's analysis, without interrupting. When Elena finished, Claudette sat for a moment in the silence of a person integrating new information into an existing picture. He told the board the lot was a liability, she said. Maintenance costs, liability exposure, no productive use. He said sale proceeds would fund 10 years of HOA operations. She looked at the deed. He never mentioned the restriction. He had access to the original, Elena said. He knew, Claudette said. I voted against the authorization because it felt wrong and I couldn't articulate specifically why. And Clifton, she stopped. Then, after the meeting, in the parking lot, he came to me. He said I needed to understand that community leadership required experience and perspective that not everyone had developed yet, and that perhaps when I had been on the board longer I would have a better sense of when to trust the judgment of the people around me. Elena looked at her steadily. I'm a retired city planner, Claudette said. I spent 22 years managing public land use processes. I have more real estate governance experience than Clifton Marsh has forgotten. She said it without heat, as a factual correction, the way she would correct a data point in a planning report. He told me I lacked the experience to evaluate a transaction I had correctly identified as problematic. In the parking lot. While I was the only person in that meeting who had voted correctly. And the room let him do it, Elena said. The room let him do it, Claudette said. Because when a board president tells a 60-year-old woman, very pleasantly, that she simply doesn't have the perspective yet, most people in the room think, well, maybe she doesn't. Maybe it's inexperience. He's very good at making dismissal sound like mentorship. A pause. It worked on me for about a week. Then I thought about it more carefully. She looked at Elena. You're 38 years old, she said. You're not a resident here. You have no formal standing in any of this. No, Elena said. And you found all of this. I had help, Elena said. And I had reasons he didn't expect me to have. Claudette considered this. What do you need from me? I need someone with authority to call a special membership meeting, Elena said. The information needs to reach the community before Clifton controls the narrative. That has to come from inside, from someone with standing. It can't come from me. I have the authority, Claudette said. It'll create conflict. Yes, Elena said. He'll try to shut it down. Let him try, Elena said. Everything he does to prevent the community from having accurate information will be part of the record. Claudette looked at her for a long moment, the assessing look of a person deciding how much to trust, and arriving at a conclusion. Let's call this meeting, she said. The special meeting notice went out on a Monday. Clifton Marsh called Claudette within an hour. Claudette reported the conversation to Elena with the precision of a former city planner who understood the evidentiary value of accurate notes. He had said the meeting was premature. That it was based on outside interference from a non-resident. That he expected, as board president, that it would be postponed until the board could provide proper context. Claudette had told him the meeting was proceeding. He sent an email to the full HOA membership that evening, the first communication he had sent about the lot in 4 years of presidency, describing the proposed sale in favorable terms. Significant revenue. Elimination of a maintenance liability. Responsible stewardship. The email made no mention of the deed restriction, no mention of Elena's proposal, and no mention of the Whitfield family's formal notice, which Kevin had sent by certified mail 3 days earlier. 2 days before the meeting, he came to the HOA management office. Elena was there with Claudette, reviewing the meeting agenda, when the door opened without a knock. Clifton Marsh walked in the way people walk into spaces they consider theirs, unhurried, certain, the body language of a man who had never had occasion to doubt his welcome. He was tall, silver-haired, wearing the kind of careful grooming that communicated professional standards even on a weekday afternoon. He looked at Elena. Not with hostility, that would have been simpler. With the specific expression of a person who has categorized someone and is mildly surprised to find them still present, still requiring attention, still constituting a situation that needed to be managed. It was the expression she had seen at the curriculum fair, in grant review meetings, in the faces of administrators who had received her program proposals and found them charming. The expression of someone who had decided what she was before she opened her mouth. Ms. Vasquez, he said. I think we should talk. We should, Elena said. He sat down and arranged himself with the ease of someone who managed difficult conversations professionally. He produced a smile, not warm, not cold, precisely calibrated for the purpose of seeming reasonable while establishing hierarchy. I appreciate your passion for this project, he said. Educational gardening programs are genuinely valuable. But I think you may not fully understand the complexity of what the board is managing here. He paused with the delicacy of a man selecting words. Real estate transactions involve legal, financial, and community considerations that require a certain depth of experience to navigate properly. The board's responsibility is to all 340 households, not just the needs of one particular group. Elena let him finish. She had learned, over 9 years of being spoken to in this register, the patient, explanatory tone of someone breaking down complexity for a person they had decided needed it broken down, that the most effective response was not to perform anger, which confirmed the category, and not to perform deference, which validated it. The most effective response was to be precisely, factually present, and to let the accuracy of the information do what the information was built to do. I found the deed restriction, she said. A pause. Controlled, brief, but real. The 1987 transfer document, he said, in the tone of a man verifying rather than receiving. Yes, historical deed conditions of that kind require careful interpretation in the current context. The reversion clause, Elena said, doesn't require interpretation. It's specific. Commercial use triggers automatic reversion to the Whitfield Trust. Not to the buyer. Back to the family. She set Kevin's letter on the table. Rose Connors-Webb and Daniel Connors have been informed of the restriction. Their attorney has filed formal notice with this office. Any commercial sale of this lot proceeds against an active reversion claim. She paused. Meridian Commercial would pay for a property they cannot keep. Clifton looked at the letter. Something moved across his face, not the recalibration she had seen before, the surprise of unexpected competence. Something more specific. The expression of a man who has made a calculation about what a person could do, and has discovered the calculation was wrong, and is now determining the precise cost of that error. Where are you getting your legal advice? He asked. Does that change the substance of what I've told you? A pause. It didn't, and they both understood why. There's also the question of the internal HOA records, Elena said. The reformatted deed document from 2019. The version without the restriction language. She watched his face. The original is in the county recorder's office. The HOA's copy is different. That discrepancy is part of the formal case record now. Clifton Marsh was still. The quality of his stillness had changed. It was no longer the stillness of composure but of a man who has understood the full perimeter of a situation and is deciding where the exits are. The HOA membership deserves to know about the restriction before they vote on anything, Elena said. That's what the special meeting is for. The membership can decide what they want to do with their community's land when they have all the information. She met his eyes. That's how governance is supposed to work. You know that. You practice law long enough to know that. He looked at her for a long moment. The expression had changed again, no longer calculating, something more complex than that, something she couldn't name precisely but recognized as the look of a person being seen accurately and knowing it. I'll be at the meeting, he said. I know, Elena said. He left. Claudette waited until the door closed. He didn't expect any of that, she said. No, Elena said. The records question, that's what changed his face. That's criminal exposure, Elena said. Not civil. When he understood that the edited records were part of the formal case, the calculation changed entirely. She looked at the closed door. He came here today to manage a difficult community member. He's leaving knowing he has a legal problem that doesn't go away because the community member is managed. Claudette looked at her steadily. Are you all right? Elena thought about it. Yes, she said. I've been preparing for that conversation for 2 months. I was ready. You were more than ready, Claudette said. Elena picked up the letter from the table and put it back in the folder. Let's finish the agenda, she said. 48 residents attended the special meeting on a Thursday evening in late August. Claudette ran it. She was, Elena observed from the third row, exactly as good as Elena had expected, the economy of a city planner who had presided over difficult public hearings, unintimidated, precise about procedure, patient with the room's anxiety in a way that didn't allow the anxiety to be weaponized. She presented the deed restriction, the reversion clause, the business journal notice, the edited internal records, and the formal notice from the Whitfield family in sequence, copies distributed to every attendee, each piece of information allowed to land before the next one was introduced. She did not editorialize. She presented and waited, and the facts created their own weight without assistance. Clifton Marsh sat at the board table. He had come prepared, folder of documents, legal pad, the composure of a man intending to manage the narrative. He made 3 attempts to interrupt Claudette's presentation in the first 20 minutes. Each time, Claudette redirected him with the firm courtesy of a woman who had been redirecting interruptions in public meetings for 25 years and had never once lost the authority to do so. The room's reaction to the deed restriction information moved through the specific stages that rooms move through when discovering that something they trusted was not what they thought, not explosive immediately, but the slow recalibration of shared understanding, people turning to neighbors, comparing notes, the murmur of recognition. A man in the second row, Gerald, 60s, careful expression, raised his hand. Is the restriction currently being violated? Is the lot being used commercially now? Not yet, Claudette said. The commercial sale has not been completed. The Whitfield family's legal notice has paused the process. Could the sale have been completed without the membership knowing? The preliminary contract was signed without a membership vote. The membership would have been informed when a final vote was required. She paused. After the preliminary terms were established. After the deal was already made, Gerald said. After the preliminary terms were established, Claudette repeated. The distinction was there, the implication was clear, she let the room do its own arithmetic. A woman near the back, Susan, 40s, tracking everything carefully, raised her hand. Who edited the internal deed records? The room went quiet. Clifton Marsh spoke for the first time. The internal records were reformatted for administrative ease. The original deed is public record. Any member wishing to review it could have done so at the county recorder's office. Did the board know the original deed contained a restriction? The woman asked. The board was aware of the historical deed conditions, Clifton said, choosing each word with the precision of a man constructing a legal record. Was the board aware that those conditions were omitted from the internal records? Claudette asked. A pause. The board relied on the administrative records in conducting its analysis. The administrative records you maintain, Claudette said. The administrative records I maintain, Clifton said. The room absorbed this exchange. Not volatile, something quieter and more durable than volatility, the specific quality of a community understanding something about its own governance that it would not be able to understand. Then a voice from the left side of the room, a man Elena didn't recognize, late 40s, arms crossed. The woman who submitted the garden proposal. Is she here? Claudette looked at Elena. Elena stood. My name is Elena Vasquez. I teach at Jefferson Elementary, 3 blocks from here. She paused, and let that land. 3 blocks. My students live in this neighborhood. Their families pay HOA fees that help maintain this lot. She paused again. Because this was important, the children whose families funded the maintenance of the lot they were being denied access to. Earlier this year I submitted a 12-page proposal to use the lot as an educational garden program. It was rejected without a single specific objection being raised. I was told the lot was under evaluation for alternative development. She set her proposal on the table. This is what the lot could be. A half-acre garden serving 340 students. Consistent with Margaret Whitfield's restriction. Consistent with what she intended when she gave this land to the community 70 years ago. She looked at the room, not at Clifton, but at the 48 people who had come on a Thursday evening because they wanted to understand what was happening. Mrs. Whitfield didn't give this land away without conditions because she was careless. She gave it with specific conditions because she understood something about what communities need. She called it the community's heart. A garden for children is exactly what she meant. A parking structure is exactly what she prohibited. She sat down. For a moment the room was quiet. Then Gerald raised his hand again, and his question was not about the parking structure. The vote was taken 30 days later at the regular September meeting. Meridian Commercial had voided their preliminary contract 2 weeks prior. Their attorney, upon receiving Kevin's formal analysis of the deed restriction and the reversion clause, had informed Clifton Marsh that the client was withdrawing. The withdrawal had been immediate. A developer who has invested time in a preliminary contract typically looks for ways to proceed, but a developer whose entire investment would revert to a private family the moment the transaction closed had no rational path forward. Kevin had made the analysis clear enough that no reasonable reading left room for optimism. Clifton Marsh did not attend the September meeting. He had submitted his resignation from the HOA board 10 days after the August meeting, 2 paragraphs, personal reasons, no specifics. The remaining board members accepted it without comment. Claudette Morrison was appointed interim president by unanimous vote. Kevin had filed the formal case record with the Colorado Division of Real Estate regarding the edited deed document. The investigation, as of the September meeting, was active. The proposal before the membership was a long-term use agreement, drafted by Claudette, reviewed by Kevin, approved in principle by Rose Connors Webb on behalf of the Whitfield family, granting Elena's program access to the Elmwood Avenue lot for educational agriculture purposes, with the HOA retaining ownership and the school district providing maintenance support. A community access provision allowed Elmwood Park residents personal garden plots on the western section, on weekend hours. That provision had emerged from a conversation at the post-August meeting coffee table, when residents had started talking about what they actually wanted their neighborhood to look like. 61 households attended. The largest attendance in Elmwood Park's recorded history, which Claudette had verified specifically because she believed accurate records should include the things worth recording. The vote was 54 in favor, 4 against, 3 abstentions. Elena was not at the meeting. She had decided, carefully, that the vote should belong to the community without her present to influence it, that it should be the community's decision, made in the community's room, by the people whose neighborhood it was. She was at Jefferson Elementary, at her desk, grading the end-of-unit assessments her 4th graders had completed that afternoon. 12 pages each, on the water cycle and plant growth. Filled with careful handwriting and occasionally spectacular diagrams of children who had learned things they found genuinely interesting. Claudette called at 8:47. 54-4, she said. Elena set down her red pen. Thank you, she said. Thank me by growing something, Claudette said. Elena laughed, a real laugh, the uncomplicated kind, the kind that arrived when something you had been working toward arrived back. She hung up and sat in her classroom in the quiet of an empty school. The small raised beds were visible through the window in the last of the evening light, the 4 beds she had built from a $400 grant and 9 years of showing up, the beds that had always been insufficient and had been worth everything anyway. She thought about Margaret Whitfield, walking children through a garden and calling it the community's heart. She thought about Rose Connors Webb, 67 years old, answering a stranger's certified letter and saying, "Tell me what you need." She thought about Claudette Morrison, casting the only correct vote in a meeting where nobody could tell her why it was correct, holding it for 3 months on instinct alone. She thought about Robert Washington keeping violation notices for 3 years. About Phil Garza's manila envelope. About Walt Kowalski's spectrum analyzer. About all the people who had kept records in the dark on the chance that someone would eventually ask, and had been right to keep them. She thought about her grandmother's hands in the soil of an Oaxacan garden, moving with the knowledge that lived in the body before it lived anywhere else, certain and unhurried and entirely without doubt about what the ground needed and what it would give. She went back to grading. The first work day on the Elmwood lot was a Saturday in October, the last warm Saturday before Colorado autumn closed the growing season, and Elena arrived at 7 in the morning with soil amendment in her truck, borrowed hand tools, and a thermos of coffee made at 5:30 because sleep had proven unavailable. She had not expected anyone else to be there that early. Claudette Morrison was at the gate at 7:05, work gloves on, carrying a flat of winter cover crop seed and the expression of a woman who had also not slept particularly well and had decided to do something productive about it. Rose Connors Webb arrived at 7:30 with her daughter and her 12-year-old granddaughter Maya, who had driven from Aurora because Rose had told them about the garden and Maya had informed her parents she was going. Maya had researched soil composition online and arrived with opinions and a notebook and the specific confidence of a child who has done her homework and expects to be taken seriously. Gerald arrived at 8 with 3 additional bags of soil amendment, because he had been a gardener for 30 years and knew you always needed more than you brought. Susan arrived at 8:15 with a flat of garlic bulbs she said she had been planning to plant somewhere and had decided this was the somewhere. A young couple from 2 blocks away arrived at 8:30 after seeing the announcement in the HOA's new newsletter, which Claudette had redesigned to contain events that actually serve the community. By 9 Elena had 7 adults working the lot, pulling decades of compacted crabgrass, turning resistant soil with the effort of people discovering for the first time how much ground resists when it hasn't been worked, adding amendment, discovering the particular satisfaction of watching cracked gray-brown earth become dark and workable under their hands. At 9:15, a car pulled up and a woman got out with 2 children in boots and expressions of determination. She was the mother of one of Elena's 4th graders. Her daughter had told her about the garden and her son had said he was going whether anyone drove him or not. The daughter's name was Sophia. She had brought her own garden gloves. Elena watched Maya show Sophia how to test soil structure, pressing a small handful between her fingers, explaining what it meant when the soil held together versus when it crumbled. She was doing it with the patience and precision of someone who had researched this specifically and was now using the knowledge because knowledge was for using. Sophia was pressing the soil with intense concentration, trying to feel what Maya was describing. Elena crouched down beside them. "She's right," Elena told Sophia, nodding toward Maya. "You want it to hold together just slightly when you press it. That's the amendment working, giving the soil structure, so it can hold water and nutrients instead of letting them drain through. Like this?" Sophia pressed the soil. Elena looked at what Sophia was holding. "Exactly like that. You've got it." Sophia looked at the soil in her hand with the expression Elena had seen 100 times in her classroom. The expression of a child who has just learned something real, not information but knowledge, the kind that lives in the hands and doesn't leave. "Can I test this section?" Sophia pointed to an area they hadn't reached yet. "That section is yours," Elena said. She moved through the work steadily, answering questions, demonstrating technique, letting people find their relationship with the soil rather than imposing one. She watched Gerald explain to Sophia's brother the difference between topsoil and subsoil with the patience of a man who had been explaining things to people for 30 years and had never lost the pleasure of it. She watched Rose Connors Webb turn over a section of earth and stop, standing very still, looking at what her hands had done. Elena went and stood beside her. "She used to smell it," Rose said, after a moment. "My grandmother. She'd pick up a handful of soil and smell it before she did anything else. She said the smell told you what the soil needed." She looked at the dark earth in her gloved hands. "I haven't thought about that in 40 years. What did it smell like?" Elena asked. Rose thought about it. "Like something alive," she said. That's what she always said. Good soil smells like something alive. Elena picked up a handful of the amended earth and smelled it. Rich, dark, the specific organic complexity of soil that had been given what it needed. "She was right," Elena said. Rose looked at her. "She would have liked you," she said. "She would have liked this." They worked through the morning, 14 people by 10 o'clock, more arriving through the morning as word moved through the neighborhood the way word moved in neighborhoods when something was actually happening. By noon they had turned and amended a quarter of the lot. Not enough for this season, too late for fall planting, the soil needed to rest under the cover crop through winter, but enough to see what it was going to be. Claudette came and stood beside Elena at the edge of the turn section. "I want to ask you something," Claudette said. "Go ahead. When you submitted that first proposal, did you know it would come to this?" "No," Elena said. "I knew the rejection felt wrong. I knew alternative development was worth looking into. I didn't know what I'd find." She looked at the soil. "I found more than I expected." "Most people wouldn't have looked," Claudette said. "Most people have been taught that looking is someone else's job," Elena said. "That they're not the kind of person whose looking leads anywhere." She paused. "Clifton made a calculation when he sent that form letter. Not a malicious one, a probabilistic one. Based on what I appeared to be, a young Latina teacher with no standing in his community, no legal background, no obvious path to causing real difficulty. That calculation is usually correct. Most of the time, the form letter is enough. Most of the time, The person on the other end doesn't know to go to the county recorder's office, doesn't have a paralegal friend, doesn't have the particular combination of reasons and tools and stubbornness to follow the thread all the way through. But sometimes they do, Claudette said. Sometimes they do, Elena said. And when they do, the system that was built on probability encounters someone who doesn't fit the probability. And the whole thing, she gestured at the turned earth around them. The whole thing becomes something else. Claudette was quiet for a moment. He made the same calculation about me, she said. In the parking lot. He told me I lacked the experience and perspective to evaluate what the board was doing, and he said it pleasantly, and the room had already let him establish that framing, so when I went home and thought, was he right? Was I missing something? The answer wasn't obvious. She paused. It took me a week to arrive back at, no, I wasn't missing something. I was seeing something he didn't want me to see. And you held the position anyway, Elena said. Even without being able to explain exactly why. Barely, Claudette said. Barely is enough, Elena said. Barely is what kept the record alive long enough for everything else to follow. Sophia appeared at Elena's elbow, small, serious, gloves dark with soil. Ms. Vasquez. I tested the section. I think it needs more amendment here but not here. She pointed to two areas. The texture is different. Elena walked over and tested both sections herself. Sophia was right. The texture was different, the eastern end compacted further, needing more amendment before the cover crop could establish properly. You're reading it correctly, Elena said. How did you figure it out? Maya showed me how to test it, Sophia said. And then I just kept testing. She looked at her hands. It feels different when you know what you're feeling for. Elena looked at this child, 9 years old, in her own garden gloves she had brought from home without being asked, explaining the difference in soil texture between two sections of a half-acre lot on the basis of what her hands had learned in 4 hours on a Saturday morning. That's exactly right, Elena said. That's how all of it works. You learn what you're feeling for, and then the feeling tells you things it couldn't tell you before. Sophia nodded seriously and went back to her section. Claudette had heard. Is that what happened to you? She said. With the deed? Elena thought about it. My grandmother taught me that the ground has a history, she said. That before you plant anything, you need to understand what the ground has been through, what's been taken from it, what's been added, what's been ignored. You need to read the record of the ground before you can know what it needs. She looked at the Elmwood lot, at the turned earth, the 14 people working in the October light, the chain-link fence that would come down next month when the formal agreement was signed. I applied that to the deed. To the records. To the history of who had owned this land and what they had meant by giving it away. She paused. Clifton erased the restriction from his records because he thought the history could be deleted. He was wrong. The history was still there, in the county files, exactly where it had always been. The ground remembers what you do to it. That's the thing he didn't understand. Claudette stood beside her in the October afternoon and looked at the earth. Your grandmother would recognize this, she said. She would, Elena said. She'd also tell me I used too much nitrogen amendment. Claudette laughed, full and genuine. The laugh of a woman releasing something she'd been carrying. Was she right about most things? Claudette asked. About soil, always, Elena said. About everything else, maybe 60% of the time. Which is a better average than most people manage. They stood for a moment longer, looking at the turned earth and the people working it and the mountains visible to the west in the particular clarity of a Colorado October afternoon, the sky enormous and transparent, the light coming in low and direct, the whole scene with the quality of something settling into what it was meant to be. The cover crop would go in this afternoon. The soil would rest through winter, building what it needed to build in the dark and cold, preparing for the season it couldn't reach directly from here. In April, when the light came back and the temperature allowed and the ground said it was ready, they would plant. Elena picked up her trowel and went back to work. The Elmwood Community Garden opened officially in May of the following year. Rose Connors Webb drove from Aurora with her granddaughter Maya, who arrived with a flat of heirloom tomato seedlings she had grown from seed under a light setup she had built herself in February after watching 3 tutorials. The garden's first season produced 340 pounds of food, distributed between Jefferson Elementary's lunch program and the personal plots maintained by 14 Elmwood Park households on the lot's western section. Sophia's family maintained one of those plots. Her brother grew a pumpkin that required 2 adults to move. Claudette Morrison was elected HOA president by the full membership in January, the first contested election in Elmwood Park's recorded history. She ran against one other candidate. She won by a margin she described as comfortable and he described as decisive. The Colorado Division of Real Estate's investigation into the edited deed records concluded in March. The findings were referred to the State Bar Association and the District Attorney's Office. Kevin Park called Elena when the referral was announced. She was in her classroom with her fourth graders when the call came, and she stepped into the hallway for 4 minutes and then went back in and finished the lesson. Elena submitted a grant application in April for an expanded program, urban agriculture curriculum at 3 additional Jefferson County elementary schools. 47 pages. She wrote it over 4 Sundays. She was persistent about the right things. She always had been.